How would the city of Rome have looked at the end of late antiquity and the start of the early Middle Ages, so around 600 AD? We have already extensively talked about how Rome had changed from its peak in 320 AD to before the outbreak of the Gothic Wars and the devastation that the Gothic Wars caused onto the city and its inhabitants. But now let's look at Rome some 50 years after the Gothic Wars. How must it have been to walk through the streets of this once great city? By now, we have established that the true disaster for the city of Rome came with the Gothic Wars, when the Eastern Roman general Belisarius entered the city in 536, until the city was retaken a final time again by the Eastern Romans, but this time under the general Narses in 551, 15 years later. But in these 15 years, the city had seen 3 major sieges and was conquered and switched sides 5 times. Widespread famine caused by the climatic cooling event of 536, by the plague of Justinian after 542, and by the sieges had severely depopulated the city. Rome's population shrank from 100 to 200,000 before the Gothic Wars to a meager 30,000 after the 550s. Had the 3 sacks of the 5th century already been damaging to the city and population, at least major repairs were carried out first under the Western Roman emperors, then under Odoacer, and then under Theodoric. The urban prefects of Rome continued to maintain and repair the city with tax revenue until 536. But the Gothic Wars destroyed the Ostrogothic kingdom, and as we have seen in this video here, paradoxically, the Eastern Romans were not really interested in rebuilding Rome or restoring its ancient splendor. No imperial state money was allotted to Rome for restoring its monuments. The vigiles were not patrolling the streets anymore as in the times of Maiorianus, of Odoacer, of Theodoric, in order to protect the ancient monuments. No care or money was invested by the Eastern Romans in order to repair the damages caused by the Gothic War. Narses, the Eastern Roman general, lived in Rome after definitively defeating the Goths in 553, and he lived in the old imperial palace on the Palatine Hill. It is said that he lived there until his death in 573, although this is sometimes disputed. But had the palace been still repaired under Theodoric, where the Ostrogothic king allotted the revenue from the wine tax for repairing the grand old imperial palace, no repairs are reported to have taken place under Narses. In fact, we know that Narses even plundered some statues from the desolate temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus in order to adorn his chambers in the palace. Had Rome still retained some of its magnificent imperial splendor under the Ostrogothic kingdom, the decay would now start to run rampant without anyone organizing maintenance and repairs of the old grandiose buildings. So a few decades after Narses' death, by AD 600, the situation had worsened even more. The Senate had completely disappeared by now. So had the old Roman institutions and the old Roman offices. They were all destroyed in the Gothic Wars. By now, the Christian Church was the only surviving institution from the imperial time, and the popes had emerged as the main force of the city after the Senate had been destroyed in the disastrous war. In 600 AD, Pope Gregory the Great held the highest office of the Western Christian Church. It is from Gregory that we have quite detailed accounts on the state of the city in those dark times. In fact, the early Middle Ages had now arrived in Italy. Could we still say that Italy and Rome were in late antiquity before the Gothic Wars? By AD 600, we can clearly state that the Dark Ages had started arriving also in this oldest province of the former Roman Empire. Gregory was born in 540 in Rome, so in the middle of the Gothic War. He witnessed the whole disasters of the mid-6th century unfold and could bear testimony to the ever-increasing decay and misery that Rome was facing. And after 568, the Lombards invaded Italy, as was so often the case in the period of the Great Migrations. Two parties would fight each other to the brink, and the third one used the weakness and power vacuum in order to settle within the borders of the empire. Thus, after 568, the newly conquered territories of the Roman Empire would after this short time already cease to be part of the Imperium Romanum and would be now part of the Kingdom of the Lombards. And please like this video and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting our work on Patreon or via YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel unfortunately depends on your support. YouTube is absolutely not generous to such a niche topic about the late Roman Empire, and the ad revenue consequently is really low. So in order to be long-term sustainable, I really need your financial support via Patreon or YouTube membership, as sorry as I am to say this. I think Maiorian would thank you for supporting a channel bearing his name. I certainly do thank you, dear friends. Gratias agut tibi, amici. So Pope Gregory went to Constantinople in 578 and asked the emperor for military help against the Lombards, but the ever-looming threat of the Persians in the east, and now also Slavs who were pushing down from the north from the Danube frontier, didn't allow the Eastern Romans to send troops. Thus Gregory was on his own. He alone had to upkeep the now ever faster decaying city. And from 590 until his death in 604 in Rome, he describes the utterly desolate picture that Rome must have presented back then. The city was depopulated by constant famine and disease. The Tiber was regularly flooding the city, the moisture facilitating the spreading of diseases. Old monuments of antiquity were crumbling left and right. What still had been maintained under Theodoric was now fully given price to the elements. Earthquakes would damage buildings from time to time, and now of course nothing was ever repaired or restored. Collapsed columns were left lying on the ground, collapsed temples and other ancient monuments not restored. The building materials even collected and looted to build new buildings. The outlying parts of the city were by now completely abandoned and given price to decay. The remaining 30,000 people were now living in the area of the old Campus Martius and the Forum Boarium. The Forum Romanum saw its last building activity with the Column of Phocas in AD 608 in honor of the Eastern Roman usurper Phocas, who reigned in that time in Constantinople. A very strange honor, as this emperor was not a really friendly guy. However, it is believed that the column was not newly built, but that a collapsed column of the Imperial Forum was just re-erected and a statue of Phocas put on top. And already that must have represented a Herculean act in this age of decay. But already by that time, the Forum Romanum must have offered a quite sad picture. It was still maintained in the early 6th century under Theodoric, so much so that in AD 500 the African monk Fulgentius, upon seeing the Roman Forum, had exclaimed, "How magnificent must the heavenly Jerusalem be when the earthly Rome shines so brightly." But 100 years later, after the disasters of the Gothic Wars, the Forum was not kept in repair anymore. The buildings were crumbling. Vegetation was starting to overgrow the ground level and the buildings. The column of Phocas must have seemed like a parody amidst this growing decay. Not long afterwards, the Forum Romanum was given up, possibly after a big flooding of the Tiber in the first half of the 7th century. The retreating Tiber left large amounts of silt and residue, which would slowly start raising the ground level. So would the Forum Romanum slowly start to decay ever faster, and we can assume that by the 9th century the ground level had been already overgrown with grass, and by the later Middle Ages it had been transformed into a cow pasture. Building material was scarce, and so collapsed temples that still might have been repaired in AD 530 were now looted for building material in order to construct new housing or churches. The people started building smaller housing in the decaying imperial fora. Churches were built from materials of collapsed temples. Rome had started the process of cannibalizing itself and transforming itself into a medieval city. New smaller dwellings were built into larger structures, such as happened for example at the theater of Marcellus and many other places throughout the large city. The baths had already been abandoned since the Goths had cut the aqueducts in the siege of 537. The Colosseum would not be repaired anymore, but after every earthquake it was looted for building materials. The temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, closed in 395 on orders of Theodosius, looted in 455 by the Vandals, the gilded roof torn down, again looted in 571 by Narses, was still standing on the Capitoline Hill, an empty, barren, desolate husk, reminding the people of a grand time that by now seemed like a distant dream, like a legend. The people wandering through the immensely large structures must have thought that the buildings were the work of giants. The Circus Maximus, once built to seat up to 250,000 people, now was tenfold too large for the entire population of the city. The Colosseum, able to seat 50,000 people, only 5% of the peak population of Rome, was now able to almost host twice the population of the entire city. The populated core at the Campus Martius and Forum Boarium would now be the center of activity, while most of the city would be abandoned. A term would later be coined for this phenomenon: habitatio and dishabitatio, populated areas and depopulated areas. Rome would now slowly start turning into a vast field of ever faster decaying buildings, completely empty and abandoned, and a small habitated medieval core near the Tiber River. Thus we can say that the disaster for Rome started with the Gothic Wars, and the real decay started after the 540s, and by 600 Rome would be in free fall. The only buildings surviving in Rome from the imperial time, such as the Pantheon or the Curia Julia, only survived because they were transformed into Christian churches. After AD 600, Rome had begun its long transformation from imperial capital to medieval city. And if you are interested in how exactly Rome must have looked during the Gothic Wars, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in Rome in the late Imperial Age, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias amici imperii Romani, and bene valete.